Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Peggy West, and I am the organizer and co-host with Rudy Martin today. We got the advertisement. You know, this is on construction documents explained. That pretty much explains the entire topic. Hopefully, you'll go away today with a greater understanding of construction documents. We also have a legal representative on today. And with that, I just want to go on and say thank you for joining us and thank you, sponsors. And I want to do an introduction of the sponsors. So let me start with Vinteum Software. Vinteum is the wind beneath my wings, the IT support running our program today, but they also are the web designers for websites for condominiums and homeowner associations. We have Laura on today. Laura, tell us about yourself and what Vinteum is doing for associations.
Thank you, Peggy. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura. I'm the sales executive here at Vinteum. So what we do here at Vinteum is that we help communities, property managers, property management companies with basically giving them software for them to make their work a lot easier. So we will build websites, also residence portals that can also work a lot for property managers for them to go ahead and manage multiple communities at once and in one single place. We not only do this too, but we also provide training to board members, to their property managers if they're currently working with a property manager or a property management company. We provide ongoing support as well. We, especially in Florida, comply with e-voting regulation, documents regulation. We even have a Zoom integration on so you guys can have your board meetings recorded and uploaded on a platform where residents can access to it. So if any of you guys is interested or if any of you guys it's not fully comfortable with the current system or tools you're having right now, I encourage you guys to go ahead and get contact with us. We'll be sending our information through the chat. And yeah, remember, my name is Laura. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura. And thank you guys for all you do. Next, I want to introduce Daniel Baum. He's the CEO and the founder of COA Solutions, an insurance brokerage. Daniel, you want to tell us about yourself?
Thanks, Peggy. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Daniel Baum. I'm with COA Solutions. We specialize exclusively in insurance for condominiums, HOAs, and multifamilies here in Florida. What today's session is really going to highlight is how critical it is to understand construction documents, not just from a project management standpoint, but also from a risk and insurance perspective, because the reality is those documents are what ultimately determine who's responsible for what when something goes wrong. One example we see all the time is builders' risk situations. There's often an assumption that a contractor has it covered. But in many cases, either they don't, or the limits aren't sufficient, or the association isn't properly protected in the policy. And during major projects like roof replacements or significant concrete restoration, anything that exposes the building, that's when the property is actually at its highest risk. So my role is to help boards and property managers connect those dots ahead of time, making sure there's no gaps between the property policies, the general liability policy, and what's happening during construction so that the community is fully protected, not just after the project is completed, but throughout the process. And that's really where understanding what these construction documents say and how this is handled throughout is really important. So thank you very much for allowing me to be a part of this. I love supporting this type of education, as you all know, and I look forward to hearing the presentation as much as the rest of you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Daniel. That's awesome. Okay, next I want to introduce Danny Gurgis. He's with Clarkson and Varick today. Danny, tell us about yourself and what you all do for associations.
Thank you, Peggy. Good morning, everybody. Danny Gurgis, managing partner of Clarkson and Varick. We're a national elevator consultant firm. And, we're here because, elevators are very complicated. And, to try to get full transparency from the contractors, whether it's an ongoing repair issue, shutdowns, project management and whatnot, we're here to be an owner's advocate, right? And then provide you with the transparent situation of what's actually taking place. So we do everything from we have our own in-house professional engineers and architects. We'll do the project management of all your elevators. If you're facing a modernization, there's a lot of new codes coming up, right? So a lot of safety regulations for elevators, and elevators are becoming more complicated as they get smarter. They're actually shutting down a lot more because they're recognizing when things go bad. They're supposed to be shutting down. So if you are running running through any problems in regards, at your associations, your buildings, or if you're coming up to some modernizations and upgrades that need to be done, we're here to support you guys. So that's what we do here at Clarkson and Barrett. And I'll put my contact info in the chat.
Awesome. Okay, great. That's awesome. Next, I want to introduce Cameron Andres. He's on today from Best Roofing. Cameron, tell us about yourself and what Best Roofing does for associations.
Thank you, Peggy, and happy Friday, everybody. My name is Cameron Andres. I do business development with Best Roofing. We're a commercial roofing contractor based in Fort Lauderdale, servicing all the way up north to Stuart, all the way south to the Keys. We do have the largest service fleet in Southeast Florida, so we're well equipped to handle any kind of roofing projects you might have, from a 50-building condo re-roof to a small single-family home repair. We're here to help you with anything roof-related at all. As we get into hurricane season, it might be a good idea to have us come out, do a complimentary roof audit for you, get somebody out there, take some pictures, see if there's any immediate repairs that need to be done, give you a life expectancy of your current roof, and give you a budget for a re-roof whenever that time does come. We're very happy to do that for you, so I will leave my information in the chat and enjoy the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. What a great idea to do a pre-evaluation on the roofs. Next, I'm going to go with introducing Jamie Gelfand. She's Vice President over at First Citizens Bank. Jamie, tell us about yourself and what the bank offers to the associations.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. Thanks, Peggy, for putting together another wonderful class. My name is Jamie Gelfand. I'm the Regional Sales Officer at First Citizens Bank, covering Southwest and Southeast Florida. First Citizens is a 125-year-old top 20 bank. We in the CAB, Community Association Bank Division, provide services to management companies, accounting firms, large self-managed associations. So as you're listening to all of these presentations and are thinking, how am I going to finance this? We are able to work with you. We do not require you to move your operating accounts to obtain a loan. My personal experience is I was a property manager for 30 years and been in banking for 12. So I have the experience to help guide you on how to best secure financing for your association. My information will be in the chat, and I hope you enjoy today's class.
Great. Thank you so much. Yes, and she started when she was 12 also, so thank you so much. I'll just mention the next couple that are not on today, but we have Hafer, CPA firm that is also a sponsor. They are full service with 4 offices around the state. Nicole Johnson Pendergrass is the contact there. And I also sent out a sponsor sheet following this, and everyone's contact information will be on there. We also have Faster IO. This is a streaming service, kind of replaces the cable service that you have. It's very interesting because you can actually take this service anywhere in the country that you travel, and internationally into Canada as well. Bob Aleka is the Vice President for Community Services, and his partner is also the Vice President of Marketing, Michael Zirin. So they will be on the sponsor sheet. We also have the Paving Lady. The Paving Lady is located out of Boynton Beach, Florida, but they are covering from Orlando over to the East Coast and south down to Miami now. A couple of offices to pull from. Dawn Miller is the contact there. So feel free to reach out to her for an estimate. And if ever you can't reach anyone on that contact sheet, feel free always to reach out to me. With that, I'm going to turn this over to our co-host, President of GM Painting, Rudy Martin. He's also today's moderator. Rudy, you want to take it from there?
Thank you, Peggy. My name is Rudy Martin. I'm the president of GM Painting and Construction. We're a painting and concrete restoration firm based in South Florida. We're here to help. We've been doing these things for many years now. The whole point of this webinar series is we're going to have a continuing education, and then we're going to get into a panel discussion. We're going to do it a little bit different. We're going to do the continuing education and the panel discussion all at once. So please use the Q&A button. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat button and there's a Q&A button. If you can use the Q&A button for your questions, we can kind of track these and we can kind of copy and paste these when we put those back out. So you have those answers. When you ask them in chat, they kind of get lost. The chat box is for positive comments, for information sharing. The Q&A is for questions. So please keep that in mind when you're asking questions. And there's no such thing as a stupid question. Please ask away when Ben starts talking about all of his content. If you have a question, put it in the Q&A. We'll try to get it answered. If we can't answer it right now, we'll get back to you at some point. This is being recorded, so there will be a YouTube link. And at the end of this, Peggy's going to send out everybody's contact information, a snapshot of kind of what they do, and that YouTube link. So if you want to kind of reference this, if you want to share it with a board member, if you want to share it with a property manager, if you want to share it with your team, we will have access to that. So thank you, Vinteum, and thank you, Peggy, for putting that together. So we've got a few panelists. We have a few experts. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we'll eventually introduce Ben, and Ben will get into his presentation. So Greg, please introduce yourself and give us a quick snapshot of what you guys do.
Yeah, thanks, Rudy. Good morning. My name is Greg Main-Baillie. I represent Colliers. We are a commercial real estate services firm. My vertical line of business is owner's rep project management. We have offices throughout South Florida, Southwest Florida, Central Florida, and Tampa. And basically in the commercial world and in the condo world, we bolt on next to the property manager and execute the administrative process of construction management from the owner's perspective, ensuring that the correct consultants are hired at the onset of a project, whether it be a pool deck renovation, which requires an architect and landscape architect to head up the design team, and subsequently the contractor that is then bid the work out to. We administrate that process on the client's behalf, offering a transparent process throughout the project, all the way through completion and punch.
Thank you, Greg. As we start talking about construction documents, there's no better way to kind of get all those kitted together. We'll go into that future detail, and Greg's going to be a big part of this webinar, so we're excited to see what he has to say. And then there's the legal aspect, right? It's involved in every single contract, and good contractors and good engineers, they champion lawyers. They want them to get involved. They want to make sure everyone's protected. And Frank will have a lot to do and a lot to say about that. Frank, will you please introduce yourself and give us a snapshot of what you do?
Thank you, Rudy, and thank you, Peggy, for putting this together. Appreciate it. Looking forward to lively discussion with all of you on these contracts and the litigation that ensues from it. My name is Frank Soto. I'm one of the partners here at BallJanik. BallJanik is a Florida-based firm. We have 5 offices throughout the state. Our main office is in Orlando. We have offices in Tampa, Sarasota, Fort Lauderdale, and here in Miami. We are your construction attorneys. I handle a majority of a construction defect litigation work. And in that construction defect litigation, usually what happens before or after, or even during, are oftentimes repair projects, whether it be restoration projects, emergency repair projects. And with that comes the topics that we're going to be touching on today, which is your contracts and making sure that you have everything covered in those contracts. So looking forward to this. Is a great panel. I've worked with Colliers. I've worked with Epic for many years. Really good panel. Rudy, I've known your company for many years. So this is a pretty solid, high-end panel, and I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. With no further ado, let's roll right into it. Ben, please introduce yourself, and if you feel like it, just roll right into the slides.
Sure. Awesome. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm happy to see everybody here, and thank you for the opportunity to go ahead and speak. My name is Ben Messerschmidt. I am a professional engineer with Epic Forensics Engineering. I'm also a principal with the firm. We are very true to our name with, if you can see it, Forensics and Engineering, the subtle big sign behind me. but about half the business focuses on the forensic and the legal aspect of things if there's a lawsuit. I, for one, am also a testifying expert, so I do that pretty regularly, as well as also support any of the reconstruction, engineering, design that you see all across South Florida, and probably all across the state, for one way or another. So we're really going to be a client advocate here. We really push hospitality aspect of things. About 90% of our clients are really going to be in the community association space. So we understand the pushes and pulls that you all may be dealing with, and having transparency and just a solid team is really, really paramount in these situations, whether things are going well or they're not going well. Um, so with that, at least, let's go ahead and let's get the discussion going. So let me just make sure I got everything up and functioning just fine, and then we should be in good shape. One moment. All right. Share. Okay. If someone could be so kind and just let me know whether or not you see my screen.
You got
You're
it.
good.
All right. Perfect. Okay. So, as mentioned, today we're going to be discussing construction documents. So, it's mainly going to be focusing these one, two, three, these 7 items right here. So it's going to intended to go ahead and start from start to finish, obviously, focusing first on the planning phase. Now, while we have, while we can't spend a whole day really on just the planning, I want to go ahead and just briefly touch on that initially, because there's a fair amount of content that even occurs just during the course of any sort of construction project. So a lot of what we're going to be discussing today is going to be primarily useful for any multi-month project. So any medium to large scale project, I would go ahead and say something that would have typical billing structure as far as like pay apps of receiving them once a month, with progress billing, and obviously something that's going to assemble a team very similar to the panel of what we have here today. So with that, I'm getting into the actual plans. So, and even before this, honestly, it's more of a planning phase, I would go ahead and say. So independent of what you have going on the property, whether it be a capital improvement project or just something that you need to do by necessity, whether it be through reserves or otherwise, whether correcting construction defects is also a common reason as well. The planning phase is quite honestly the most important phase of the entire process, in my opinion. By having poor planning, it's going to be much tougher to go ahead and have a successful project, meaning that everyone involved is going to have to be thinking a whole lot more. There's going to be a whole lot more decisions made on the fly, and you're introducing a whole lot more variables, which quite honestly is not a winning solution. So having all those thoughts and all those questions answered as much as reasonably possible on the front end before you're in the throes of construction, and the timeline pressures that may occur and financial pressures that may occur is really going to be encouraged here. So I'll just touch on these actual points first, and then we'll just start discussing amongst the group itself. So pretty straightforward. I mean, who goes ahead and designs those plans? It's going to be an architect or an engineer. We're going to use this term AE pretty frequently throughout the course of the presentation. So whenever you see architect, engineer can also be the replacement, and vice versa. Okay, A/E is pretty common as far as the industry is concerned. Now, the plans are intended to go ahead and depict the proposed construction scope with the associated details, meaning that the burden of the engineer is not to go ahead and give you the Lego or the IKEA instructions, okay? We're not going step 1 to step 100. That is well above and beyond the intent here. The engineer or designer's focus is to go ahead and show the overall layout. Hey, we want to go ahead and build this 20-story condo tower that's going to have this footprint, that footprint is going to have this exterior. And oh, by the way, we're assuming that everybody knows how to build a level floor, but watch out, we have some unique details that we need to go ahead and make sure we're paying attention to by way of these columns that are coming through, and transitions, and where these stairs come in, or even on a pool deck, for example. So you have the horizontal deck, and you may have some unique planters that pop up, and a pool. So the details as those transitions occur, and also a general detail for the planters or for the body of water, is going to be included in there. But it won't be first start pouring the concrete, second start with your waterproofing, third go with your tile. That's not the intent whatsoever. that would more likely fall in lines of means and methods, which is going to be solely a construction function. Whenever you see means and methods, that is always going to be construction. Plans are going to be permitted, obviously, and they should be permitted. The contractor is going to be the one to go ahead and pull that actual permit. So the general process, as far as plan development, is really going to go roughly as follows. And when we'll get into the detail further in the discussion, is ultimately you're going to start off with a bid set of plans, okay, which we'll arbitrarily call a 90% set or a 75% set of plans. That is intended to go ahead and distribute out to all the bidders, all the construction bidders. They're going to come back. They may have questions along the way that may necessitate actual modification to those plans. But either way, all those numbers come back on that bid set. Once a contractor is selected, ultimately it'll be turned into a permit set. That permit set will get submitted with the contractor or by the contractor to the municipality or whatever the authority having jurisdiction may be to go ahead and obtain that permit. And there may be some iterations back and forth, some comments may occur, and they'll just be tracked. And then once that actual permit is obtained and you're off to the races, that becomes a construction set. And there will absolutely be various iterations of that construction set during the course of it, because especially when dealing with existing structures or existing properties, things are going to get complicated. Believe it or not, the original plans might not be accurate. So while the engineers involved and architects do their best to go ahead and make sure that's going to take place, things can and will be missed. And at the end of the project, the construction set is going to go ahead and turn into an as-built set or a record set, which is intended to be the latest and greatest, should show as much possible detail as possible, and should be a direct reflection of what you see out on site. But again, that's a pretty high bar. Just some quick examples of what we're talking about, how plans can look. You're going to have a variety of different designers involved. You're going to have architects, structural engineers, mechanical, electrical, plumbing. It all depends on what you have going on. So you may see some typical layouts or some floor plans of what you see here, and some unique details that I made mention of previously on the bottom right-hand corner, as you see. Or you get to the structural plans, we start to talk pretty heavy, and ultimately looking at, this is going to be like I believe this is just a pile cap plan, at least showing the foundation slab and all your individual piles punching through here, and your steel bars coming over in and out. So with that as the framework, and assembling the team, I think usually in this scenario that the best person to go ahead and get involved is going to be someone like Greg to go ahead and start herding all these cats, so to speak. So as part of that very easy process, I'm sure, and then no headache whatsoever, Greg, why don't you give us a little bit of insight as to the process and procedure of assembling the right team?
Yeah, I think thanks for the intro, Ben. I think it's very important, folks, because when you look at the two most common projects that are ongoing in the market right now, either a deck renovation or an upgrade, which Ben referred to recently, you need a landscape architect, typically a lighting consultant, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing designers involved in that process. Not to mention the fact that on a pool deck, if you're making any alterations to the property, that actually has to go through the health department as well, which is another layer of jurisdiction that is involved. But ideally, it is a dance between the owner, the engineer, and the contractor in that what we refer to as the pre-construction phases of the project. And those plans that Ben is showing you are actually contractual documents and become part of the construction contract and are referenced in the agreement between the contractor and the owner during the negotiation process when you're actually signing up to kick off in construction. So extremely important. As you can see from the set that's on your page, typically they will come as a dated set with a revision, so that the contractor can then submit a pay application based on the drawing set and physically what he is putting in place. And if he comes into any unforeseen conditions during that process, as Ben mentioned, those are annotated, those are logged and submitted as part of your monthly pay application. So really, the very first document that you put out as an owner requesting an engineer or an architect to come and design whatever that capital improvement need is extremely important to have that initial contact with that consultant, rather than the property manager, as an example, going to the market because he knows that there is an RTU replacement and just asking the contractor to provide a replacement piece of equipment typically doesn't result in an apples for apples submittal from a contractor or a vendor. So highly important to get that engineer architect in place that can specify specifically what is needed to take place on site. And from that aspect, I'll turn it over to Rudy for comment.
Yep, that's exactly right. This is where it all begins. This is the ingredients list. And this doesn't mean we're going to bake a perfect cake, because an engineer and an architect and a manufacturer, they could all have a good set of plans. And when we get to the site, that window might not be the right window for this application, and there might have to be some changes made. But for the most part, this is exactly what we want. We want a good set of plans. We want to start with this phase, and we're going to build from here. So this is absolutely crucial. This is the foundation of the project.
And the one last thing to close that off is really going to be, I want to emphasize the whole bidding process and the importance of the bidding process. So, and things to learn and some easy, quick takeaways just from an owner's perspective as well, is like, if you are, regardless of the project, if you are to go ahead and go out to bid and you are getting numbers that are, and I'll just throw random numbers out here, but you have an expected project of $100,000, but you have numbers that are coming in at $25,000 up to $1 million. And you have a massive, massive spread if you were to go ahead and throw that across the board. Something's going on. That's not a successful bidding process, to keep it lightly. Having as narrow of a variance is going to be recommended initially, just as taking the temperature of it. Having a narrow variance, to me, is tooting my own horn, is going to be a good plan set. That is a good planning phase. That is good teamwork right there. You've established tight bidding parameters, meaning that your bid form, which goes correspondingly with the actual bid set of plans, is going to be just the itemized out. Okay, all right, well, here's a general conditions clause. Here's the mobilization cost. Here's the stucco item. Here's the concrete item. Here's the post-tensioning item. Here's the waterproofing item, so on and so forth. But it is laid out to a point that you remove levels of subjectivity, so that you can accurately have apples to apples instead of apples, oranges, pears, and watermelons. So that is the step one. And even also utilizing that process to have it as a wish list as well. This is where you might start discussing with your community and with your engineer, of saying, okay, well, we can go with XYZ product and get a 10-year warranty or a 5-year warranty, or we can do a little bit more and potentially obtain a 20-year warranty. Okay. To someone that may not know a whole lot about this, they might say, all right, well, that sounds really cool. How much is it? Can I afford it? I don't know. Let's go ahead and bid it out. Alternate 1, alternate 2, alternate 3. But you are utilizing that bidding process to obtain numbers from multiple vendors, as opposed to being married to a singular vendor halfway through a project, and you don't really have much of a choice if you want to go ahead and make a move or make a change there. So the bidding phase alone is very critical. You'll get a lot of consultation from your professionals on the front end, meaning your engineer and your owner's rep, at least for the nuts and bolts right there. And when said, sorry, go for it.
You'll have a list of your apples, your oranges, and your bananas, and the base cost of all those ingredients, which is the project. Let's use $100,000. Everybody's coming in at 100, 105, 110, 95. So we know we're on the right track. We know we got a good set of plans. Everybody kind of understands it. Well, somebody's apple might be 50,000 and somebody else's apple might be 25,000. So the general conditions number could be really high, but the line item number could be really low. And now it gets confusing. The bottom numbers make sense, but everyone has a different way, to kind of paint this picture, and everyone goes to kind of business different. I know this from being in restoration a good part of my life, that I've seen other, bid forms, and they could be all over the place. And this is why you lean back on the owner's rep, and they make a call to the contractor and say, okay, why are you so high here? Why are you so high here? Not that they're trying to beat us up on price. They just want to kind of understand our means and methods to our approach in pricing this deal. So that's when you get that owner's rep involved. That's when they have a conversation with the engineer, because the owner's rep and the engineer, they've seen hundreds of bid forms. They know what the industry average for these items are. And that's why it's so crucial for people to have an owner's rep and have an engineer that is experienced, so that they can reference that and they can make sense of it and they can have that conversation.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, I think, there are hundreds of line items on a complex project. And the last thing that you want to do is to have the contractor make a mistake on a particular line item that affects your project and you, the ownership, right? So in the bidding phases, when we go out to bid and put an RFP out to the contracting community for a deck renovation or anything of that sort, that process takes about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the size of the deck and complexity of the assignment. Now, once the initial numbers come back, they typically come back with a substantial amount of questions and clarifications that have to be communicated through the owner's rep to the engineer. And then subsequently, once they have been answered, typically your owner rep and engineer are sitting down with each individual contractor for about a day to go through every single line item and understand what they have maybe missed or over exaggerated, because ideally you want that contractor to be successful, right? And you want them to have everything answered before they start the project. That way you have clear planning and a clear defined path to the finish line from the get-go. So just like Rudy mentioned, it is not trying to beat them up. It's not trying to it's not trying to tell anyone the answer to the question, but merely make sure that they have understood the intent and the design intent of the engineer.
Exactly. And I'm happy that Rudy brought up that point regarding the general conditions is, I mean, there's only so much specificity that's really going to be transparent in that specific line item or a couple other soft cost line items. But in the bidding process, it is also important to consider that you are bidding out to, or at least you know what size of a construction company are you bidding out to. Okay, like whether you're bidding out to, and I'm just using bondability as probably the easiest gauge as far as sizing of contractors, where you have a contractor that's bondable to 5 million, contractor bondable to 10 million, contractor bondable to 50 million. Okay, so 50 million is going to be a little bit of the whale in the room. Ultimately, they're going to have likely to be a bigger firm, might have a lot more overhead. So their general conditions might be greater, for example, compared to the $5 million bondable individual. So understanding that is certainly beneficial. You don't need to be an expert in any of these categories whatsoever. It's why you have your professionals involved. But still, understanding that on the front end is going to be very important to a successful project. So let's get over to the contract section. So, all right, you've now in the process, you've decided on which contract you want to go with. You want to go with Rudy because he's great. So Rudy gets a job. Now he's just verbally awarded that. Okay. Now it's time to go ahead and put pen to paper. You need to set up a contract. All right. From my general recommendation, I really like utilizing AIA documents, so the American Institute of Architects, whether in part or in whole. They've been around for forever, for lack of a better term, and there's a lot of good value to even just their separate exhibits. Usually, or this should be certainly an attorney drafted contract in some way, shape, or form. Again, this is why you have these professionals involved in the first place. They do your general stuff. They also will be there to be your advocate and support you in new endeavors. One thing that is important to understand is that for the overwhelming majority of community association projects, they tend to be design, bid, build projects, meaning that there's no contractual relationship between me, the designer, and Rudy, the contractor. We are both hired by the association or by the client. Okay. Now, the alternative to that is going to go ahead and be a design build project, which would essentially mean that the owner is only signing one agreement. And in the same example that I gave, it's going to be signing an agreement with Rudy, and then Rudy and I have an agreement together. So basically, design build is going to be a bit more generic as far as the projects are concerned. It's going to say, hey, my intent is to go ahead and we'll just use a pool, for example. I want a redesign of a pool. Rudy says, sure, no problem. I got it. I'll do the rendering and I'll do all the actual construction. And theoretically, nothing should fall through the cracks is the generalized intent. Design, bid, build is going to be certainly different. And that's going to be that whole bidding process with outlining those individual, more detail of the actual bid items themselves. Now, even if you don't want to go ahead and utilize AIA for whatever reason, the most widely used form within contracts from AIA are going to certainly be the pavement applications. That is a very valuable tool, certainly something that should be reviewed as part of any sort of project, just to have a level of expectation as to what you're going to get, right? Because you don't want to be surprised on the first month that, whoa, what does this look like? The contractor just has, not to say they would, but contractor just has something very informal that says, hey, you owe me $100,000 this month because I did 27.5% of work. No, I'm going to need a whole lot more detail than that to go ahead and release that, especially if you're going to be on the board to go ahead and do so. Literally, you can go ahead and look at these contracts on aiacontracts.org. That's how easy they make it. But the two ones that I would suggest reviewing for anyone on this webinar is really going to be the A series and the B series. So the owner contractor agreements and the owner architect agreements. And remember, architect, engineer, same exact thing. So while we're on this topic, one important thing as well is like understanding what exhibits need to be part of this, I think is really, really critical as from an engineering standpoint of things for us to do our job well. I've unfortunately had the privilege of being on a couple of projects where we did the design, we had everything going, and then the association unfortunately signed a contract or set up a contract and did not include my plans as part of that contract. So when I show up on the demolition site visit to go ahead and confirm that they've done enough and to see what details are there, I show up with my plans and I say, hey, Mr. Contractor, that stuff over there doesn't match my plan. What are we going to do about it? Contractor says, don't know what you're talking about. Not in my contract. Don't have to follow it. So, and contractually, it has somewhat of a valid point. So the more detail that you're able to have in the contract, the better. The better for your other parties to go ahead and do their job well. I'll be able to work with both hands untied in front of me if I have those plans included. And with that being said, I mean, Frank, are there any key items within contracts that you see that are going to be some of the more critical items to include or not so critical that want to go ahead and make discussion about?
Yeah, no, I think you hit a really important one, which is the details and having sufficient details. You can't have enough details in the contract to make sure that everybody knows what it is that they're doing in this project, from A to Z, the exhibits, the scopes. But here are the important parts, the insurance. And that's kind of like, for me, that's a really critical issue is, do you have the right insurance? And do you have bonds in place? What type of bonds do you have in place? Working with the owner's rep to make sure that the contractors that you're hiring have bondability, that have the proper bonds, that they have the insurance, they have the manpower. Delays. Of course, no construction project is ever delayed, right? So they all start and stop at the exact time. So that's a really, to me, that's probably one of the more critical ones is how are you going to deal with the inevitable delays that occur in any construction project? Are you going to have a delay damage clause? Are you going to have a provision to how to deal with, unexpected circumstances? Think back when COVID hit. How were those contracts prepared to address those types of unexpected circumstances, which shouldn't be unexpected because there's something going to happen in every project that's going to delay it. And having all of that sort of discussed, the AIA is a good starting point. But there's certain provisions in the IA which you need to elaborate upon. There's some that you want to maybe take out. Another issue that oftentimes comes up is how do you want to deal with an eventual litigation if you have to litigate? Do you want to go to arbitration? Do you want to have a mediation before you can litigate? Do you want to bypass in the 558 there's all different types of variables that you can negotiate. And oftentimes when you're negotiating that, it also impacts what type of leverage you can have with your contractor. But delays, bonds, insurance. Those are, for me, the three critical aspects when I'm looking over a contract, making sure that those are there. In addition to making sure, and when I know we're going to touch on it a little bit more, the scope of work. The scope of work. I was my ears were ringing a little bit when you started talking about at the planning stage, that you don't have to just put all the details in there. I'm like, okay. But I'll delay damages, bonding, and insurance, those are critical. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the actual scope and the details that are in there.
I'm curious to know, has anybody on the call, please comment in the chat box, have you ever dealt with an AIA doc? Have you ever had to sign one? Have you ever had one delivered to you by an owner's rep or an engineer? And if you have, please comment on how easy you felt or difficult you felt it was. I'm curious, kind of by a show of hands and comments, who have dealt with AIA contracts. When it comes to contracts, a reason you need an owner's rep, think about all of the things that are involved in a project. You have insurance, you could have a loan, you have the contract, you have the engineer, you have the contractor. Frank's going to be responsible for, the contract, but Greg, he's going to kit all this together. He's going to make sure that the contractor has, the right insurance, that there's no gaps. Daniel talked in the beginning when he was introducing himself about the risks and the gaps. You need a whole team to kind of kit this together. Greg's going to work with Frank, and they're going to work with Ben, and this is your team, and they're going to make sure that those risks are avoided as much as possible, that all the scopes of work, because we've been on projects and I've had a scope of work and it's A, B, and C, and we come across D and they're like, well, are you going to do that? I'm like, I didn't bid on D. And they're like, well, that needs to be done. And yeah, it does. Talk to the engineer and the owner's rep and have them add it. We'd be more than happy to add a price. But that scope of work is going to clearly define exactly what we've been hired and what we've bid to do is A, B, and C. If D needs to be done at a later time and you see that, and then you could go ahead and talk to them. But all of that is very crucial, and that's why a whole team is important to making sure that this gets done correctly. So.
Yeah, and one thing also that the contract will stipulate amongst the several details is going to be retainage. We'll talk more about what retainage is and its purpose once we get later into the presentation. But identifying the amount of money that should be taken out on each pay app is going to be critical. So remember, if we're talking about planning and not wanting to think as much during the course of construction and minimizing those variables, the contract is going to be the finality of that planning phase, right? So if any sort of issue arises, big or small, or a question initially arises, from an engineering standpoint of things, I'm going to two spots. I'm going to my plans, and then I'm going to the contract, all the contracts that exist. And if those answers aren't in there, then it's time to go ahead and think, right? So the hope is that you can capture as much as you reasonably can, right, within these planning phases, so that it is, okay, well, if this scenario comes up, then the contract or the plans say to do that. Good to go. Easy RFIs, easy communication. We can blow and go still. We're okay. That's the intent.
Yes.
Now, how it matches up is a little bit different.
Linda commented that she's worked with AIA docs and they were great for change orders. So I'm sure that's a topic that we're going to talk about. So we're kind of excited to kind of get to that at some point.
Absolutely. So, okay. So moving forward, at least, so you signed the contract. Everybody's stoked. Let's go ahead and get this project underway. When are we going to get boots on the ground? Engineer's going to come in and owner's rep and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. One more housekeeping item. Let's go ahead and get as many submittals out of the way as possible. Now, project submittals are going to be individual packages submitted by the contractor to the designer and owner for their review and approval, just as it's written here. This is going to be for the materials that are intended to be utilized on the project. We have some examples down below. You have your concrete, your stucco, roofing, underlayment, all the actual materials that are going to be utilized, not the tools or anything like that. We care about the specified materials. Because in my plans, for example, if I want to go ahead and specify, or if I am going to specify a specific waterproofing, I picked that for a reason. It's going to be Tremco something or other, or Sika something or other at a certain thickness, but you may see the term or approved equal. Okay. So, and that approved equal item is going to go ahead and really be it needs to perform at the same level. So if you're talking paint, you have Benjamin Moore, you have Sherwin, you got PPG, you got several others. They all have different categories, right? From economical to top tier and everywhere in between. You can't go ahead and like an approved equal won't be Sherwin's best against Ben Moore's least, right? Same sort of concept. You want to talk about cars. If I specify Lamborghini, contractor better not show up and submit a 1980 Geo Metro. Not the same. Yes, both cars perform entirely different. It's important to get these items out of the way on the front end so that there is no question whatsoever what's going to go ahead and be utilized. So that once the inspecting engineer is actually on property, looking at and doing their progress inspections, there's no surprises. They should expect to go ahead and see a Meramix on there as their stucco. They should expect to go ahead and see Sika something or other concrete. They should expect to see Suprema roofing products there. And if they don't, that's going to start raising some red flags. Okay? This is all a checks and balances process. And it starts off with that paperwork. So again, that execution could be nice and straightforward. As a general rule of thumb, AIA calls out for a maximum of 10 business days as far as the review time when it gets submitted from the contractor to the designer. Obviously, if there's going to be a material change, it may take closer to that 10 days or maybe a little bit beyond. But again, making sure that it is the exact same or the same design intent is going to be critical. Now, when the package actually gets submitted, there's going to be a stamp that goes ahead and gets slapped on there. And one thing you'll immediately notice on that stamp for review, nothing says approved. Nowhere, right? Something kind of sounds like it, but it ain't there. And it won't ever be there. Plain and simple, whether it be from an engineer, a contractor, or anyone in between. The closest thing what you have here is going to be no exceptions taken, meaning that do not deviate from this, and we're okay. Then you go down the line of corrections noted, which will literally be the stamp that you see here, and then another text box on that front page of my commentary saying, okay, well, make sure that this is going to be installed at 120 mils versus the 90 mils that it says there, because I want to make sure we are meeting that 20-year warranty criteria, because the data we have is just pretty generic. Or you have a verify, make corrections, resubmit. A lot of times you'll see this if it's going to be a product change from product A to product B. Okay, engineer may not be totally familiar with it. They're going to do their due diligence, but there may be some gray area in how it is written or how it's presented, and those questions will be outlined in there in the same sort of text box. Rejected, very straightforward. Not going to happen. Sorry, let's do this again. Now, the little paragraph that you see on the screen is, you're going to see this also on every sort of stamp that exists. It is essentially there to go ahead and limit the liability of the reviewer and still put all the onus on the person submitting it. In this scenario, contractor. So this is going to be on every single one of those documents that goes ahead and gets submitted and sent back across the other way, so that once that's all green lighted, construction can go ahead and start. Now, sometimes these submittals might be occurring during the course of the project. If it's going to be something at the very tail end, let's say, like the roofing of a miscellaneous structure, which we know is going to be the last phase, that'll be submitted halfway through the project, for example, for a variety of different reasons, potentially. It might be just supply chain issues or anything else that could come up.
But how can this happen? We had a great planning phase. The smartest people on the planet. Ben probably went to school for 20 years to get all of his numbers or his letters behind his name. So how can this happen? Well, sometimes they're just little things, paint the cooling tower. Well, we can't paint the cooling tower with the same paint we painted the building. And nobody specified that. So it was one small thing that was looked over. So now I have to say, we have an issue. I don't want to be held to a standard from a warranty standpoint when that cooling tower frame fails, because the cooling tower, it's usually always wet. It's metal, it's rusted. It's not going to be the same paint as stucco, So I'm going to put something like corrections noted, and I'm going to fire back at Ben politely and professionally and say, hey, here is the product I recommend. My coaches and my father and my parents always said, don't come to me with a problem unless you have the solution. So I'll go to Ben and say, hey, for the cooling tower, we would like to submit this type of paint. Never heard of it. Let me do a due diligence check. We're good. Everyone's done. And there's going to have to be that back and forth with Greg involved and Frank involved when we come across something. And an experienced contractor isn't just going to say, here's your recipe to cook. It says bake a cake. It says sugar. Well, hopefully there's a definition of what kind of sugar. Raw sugar, granule sugar, brown sugar, cane sugar. And the devil is in kind of the details. And if they say, well, we're going to call for cane sugar. Yeah, but at that temperature, cane sugar is going to, brown the cake. You're looking for a white cake. I have a recommendation. And that's very normal. And hopefully when you have all the right players in place, that's going to avoid conflict moving forward.
And just to add a little bit to that, the stamp that Ben was talking about earlier, I've litigated that stamp many, 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 many times over in cases when, depending on what's marked, the one that says no exceptions taken, whoever marks that as the engineer or the architect, whoever it may be, the reason they're putting that one is they're saying, look, don't look at me when this goes south. Don't look at me. Look at those submittals, and if they follow the instructions and they follow those submittals to a T, and there's still an issue, then look to them, but don't look to me. And oftentimes what I've seen is that if the submittals don't have enough detail, like Rudy was talking about, something comes to mind right now is, where most of the issues usually come up is in waterproofing. When you're dealing with waterproofing, especially down here in South Florida, so you'll have a product that's specified for waterproofing, whether it's a Tremco, whether it's a Setco, whatever it may be. And it could just specify a particular product. Working with Greg and Owner's Rep, I try to insist that there's a real specificity on not only the material, but actually the method for installation of that material. It's really critical because when you find out that later on the waterproofing is not performing and there's no instructions on how to do it, well, now you're just litigating. Now you're just trying to figure out who messed up. If you have a submittal that actually has specific instructions on how to put, like a Setco type product where you have to do shiplap installation, that is very powerful to protect you as the owner when you're pursuing a potential claim to see who is actually responsible. That stamp there protects the engineer. If they mark the wrong one, everybody has liability.
And even keeping in that same vein, if this is going to be on the back end, and if you have to go through litigation, I will be diving through the details of this as well, right? Seeing whose stamps are on there, who had the opportunity to go ahead and raise their hand and say, hey, don't think this was the right material, if that was the case. So this is a documentation reflecting of who actually received it, what professional received it. Some examples. So this is what it would look like if it was going to be waterproofing. This would just be a pretty straightforward waterproofing Tremco 250 GC. The product description, basic uses. It sounds more marketing based, but the first thing that I'm going to look at as an engineer is going to be this limitation section right here. Okay, where should it not be put? Okay, definitely not on a contaminated surface. Is the first one on there. So those limitations are going to be critical to understand whether or not it can be utilized in a certain scenario. And if there's any gray area, again, the reviewer is intended to go ahead and just put in whatever commentary they may have and make sure it's part of the record. And also on the back end, you're going to see what tests does it meet, what thicknesses, any of the ASTM tests, going to be the American Standards of Testing Materials to show its performance. Okay, so how much can this thing stretch if it's supposed to be a stretchy material, for example, things like that. And what is its ponding, like how will it perform under submerged condition is another important scenario to consider in the beginning of the design phase, but also confirming in the submittal stage. And then also with the submittals, you should see a warranty sheet if it's going to be a warranted product coming from the manufacturer. And warranties can come in all shapes and sizes. The more you pay, the more you get. It could be something as minor as just a material warranty, which I like to use the scenario of an elevated planter that has a 40-foot royal palm in it. Okay, that's the only thing in this planter. And a 40-foot royal palm is obviously terribly massive, really heavy, and you have waterproofing in that planter. that is going bad for one way, shape, or other. If you have just a material warranty, you will be on the hook for removing that palm tree, removing the dirt, exposing out that waterproofing. And once that waterproofing is exposed and cleaned, and you can then prove that it failed due to the mixing of the material by the manufacturer, okay, cool. You got a warranty item right there. Awesome. Great work. So the $50,000 that you spent to go ahead and pull out that palm tree, you now got one bucket of new stuff, which only costs about $100. That
So
doesn't sound great.
what if it was the roots from the palm tree that created the error?
That is not a material warranty, so that doesn't even go ahead and execute that warranty.
So it's
So
under
that would
normal
fall
conditions.
more on the, sorry?
It's under normal conditions where anything else can't get involved. So the scenario I like to use is it's tires. There's 40,000-mile tires. Well, that's a soft suggestion. And that's under normal driving conditions. Because when I was 20 years old and I started construction and I'm ripping in and out of parking lots and I've never rotated my tires and I never checked the air in that, I could go back to them at 30,000 miles and say, I didn't get 40,000 miles. And they're going to say, well, that was under normal driving conditions. You never rotated your tires. You never kept the right air pressure. You never had them balanced. If you did, can we have the records of that? Sorry, you don't get the 40,000 miles because you didn't properly maintain it. So Frank and Greg would be more than happy, and that's probably a whole nother show on warranties, that the warranties, that you're clear on those warranties and, manage your expectations. I will say from a contractor's standpoint, and Greg and Frank can chirp in real quick on this, we don't do a lot of warranty work because the stuff usually works pretty good for the application that it's put in. It's very rare that we'll ever have to go to a manufacturer and we have a warranty issue. So, Greg, I'm sure that you've seen some, and Frank, I'm sure you've seen some. And how enforceable are those warranties as far as you guys are concerned?
So I've seen, kind of alluding to what you're saying is where they submit the warranty claim and they're like, okay, well, this grout wasn't intended for an outdoor application. So I'm not sure why you're looking at me because you put it out on the balconies or wherever it may be. But you're right. The warranties are solid. The manufacturers stand by their product. Where I have had warranty submittals is typically on roofs, roof applications. Those oftentimes we do go ahead and submit those warranty claims for the roof issues. And the biggest complaint or the biggest pushback that we get from manufacturers is, well, did you have a track to walk on? When your guy was going up there to do service on the AC equipment, that they let a piece of metal or a screwdriver or something fall down and puncture the membrane. But short of that, if you have a otherwise properly installed roof, but you still have water going under there, that's where warranty claims I've seen have been successful. Other than that, most of the time, it's really not even, doesn't even come into play because something else is going on.
Correct. And even with that roof example, I'm again thinking about on the back end, if there is going to be a defect of some sort after the project is done. From a roof standpoint of things, even getting the manufacturer involved can also even just help from a paper trail, right? So the manufacturer may come back and say, hey, this isn't a warranty item. This is a workmanship related item. Or they might point in a different direction. And from the litigation standpoint, from the expert standpoint of things, as well as for Frank's litigation standpoint of things, that also helps. You have a separate party going ahead and saying the same exact thing to, again, hopefully get a resolution. And even bringing that all the way back now. So I said the material warranty as being arbitrarily the most basic warranty. Now, if you are to go ahead and go to the other extreme of an NDL, a no dollar limit warranty, okay, that essentially means that everything is included, for lack of a better term. But as you can imagine, that's going to be a pretty costly item to go ahead and cover. So in that same planter scenario that I opened up with, that's covering removal of the planter, or removal of the palm, removal of the dirt, removal of everything, and that actual labor and material for the replacement of that waterproofing. So that large lump sum, theoretically in this scenario, would be included. And one important thing to note as well is, like, if you're going to do a large horizontal area, whether it be a roof or a pool deck, for example, the way that these areas are detailed from the design standpoint of things. So if I go ahead and, lack of a better term, for all the up, downs, left and rights, if I coat that all with the same product or the same manufacturer products, I'm able to maximize the available warranty that you as the client can go ahead and obtain. So when we were first just maxing out the warranty at a 10-year warranty, we're now able to go ahead and get a 25 because we have that uniformity everywhere. But if you have a break here and a break there, and I want to do everything besides the pool, okay, well then the max you can get is going to go ahead and be X instead of X plus Y. And also what comes in the middle is what color of white do you want? So I'm sure everybody has their woes with wanting to change the color of anything on their property and how fun of a process that is. One thing that you will never see, at least from us, as far as the submittal process is concerned, is I'm not going to pick the color for you. My interpretation of what looks good is not going to be yours, and engineers are not known for how pretty their color selection is. So that's going to be an onus on the owner. So that's going to be definitely a collaborative event that will require the owner to step up and be part of the submittal process to get that fast review time going. And Greg will certainly be the one to go ahead and push that and make sure that the association is complying with what they need to comply with as far as voting, and getting that to the forefront of the discussion as fast as reasonably possible.
Greg, how much time is choked up with the color conversation?
Too many weeks. Months, weeks and months. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to make any material changes, color, if you're taking planters out of a deck, most folks are looking to bring their asset, what they refer to as bring more relevance to the asset, because you might be older. Those material changes need to be identified in the early stages of the process, typically right around the point that the design team is released to actually go forward with design. What most folks don't realize is that, for instance, in a pool deck modernization, you are typically spending, from the time that you have your owner rep start identifying your consultants and bringing them on board, to the time that you actually get through that bidding and permitting process, is typically about 9 to 12 months, right? It takes the planning stages typically take almost as long as it can sometimes take to execute if you are in a complex assignment.
And that's where you get Frank involved, because when the board says we want to paint our building blue, and we paint the building blue, and then the association sues the board because they did not have the right to choose the color because it had to go out to vote. So although something sounds very simple as far as colors involved, you have to check with Frank. You have to get involved. Frank, have you ever seen any lawsuits over color?
Yeah. One of the things is, in particular with associations under 718, there may be some restrictions in your declaration. You may have it depending on where your building is located, but if you're located, let's say in downtown West Palm Beach or downtown Miami or downtown Fort Lauderdale, some of the signature places where there's a certain color scheme that's required for that building, before you go ahead and say, you know what, I want to get rid of this really hot pink building, I want to do something else, you got to make sure that you look at not only your declaration, but any attachments to those declarations. You may have separate agreements with certain local artists that have some type of intellectual property rights over that paint or that mural that may be on your building. So this is, I know, at first blush is like, well, it's just a color. But when you're talking about high rises, there's a lot more to it. And you got to make sure that with your counsel, you're looking through your deck, you're looking through your documents, making sure that the developer prior to turnover didn't compromise or commit you to something that you can't easily turn around and change without going through a lot of different hurdles.
And a lot of cities have community appearance boards, and the paint manufacturer will have to do renderings, and they will do renderings, and Greg will kind of walk through the process because that's his job as an owner's rep. Will have to submit renderings to the city, and they have to approve it. My strong suggestion is, if you do a rendering and it's ivory white, that you also put ivory white on the building, because they can approve ivory white and it can look great in the rendering. And then when we go to apply it on the building, that's not what the rendering looks like. And now we have to start the process all over again. So colors, as simple as it sounds, can be very complex, very time consuming, and it needs to be done the right way. So get with your professionals, get with an experienced contractor, know the rules of your city, and avoid this huge misstep.
Yeah, I'm sure a few of you on the call have heard of the Architectural Review Board, and that's pretty much popping up. Started down in Miami Beach and is moving north, and each jurisdiction is starting to realize that they have historic or artistic components within their downtowns that are on buildings that need to remain in place. We've seen RTU replacements that have removed architectural framework on the top of a building to put in the RTU and not gone and put it back, and they have not been able to close out the permit. So realize that your building is an identifiable landmark that needs to be maintained in its original configuration.
Exactly. I think architectural review boards and historical boards are probably the two most popular divisions in any sort of municipality. One thing also from a litigation standpoint of things and a defect standpoint of things is understanding how vibrant colors are going to work in our South Florida environment. Okay, so super bright reds, like really rich colors, those are not going to hold up. Okay, so much so that if you look at the fine print on even these worldwide manufacturers, they will talk about color fade and have exclusions for that and attempt to go ahead and say that the fading of that is not going to be representative of a failure of the product. So just be mindful that you're not going to get the performance out of a lime green as you would from an off-white. Okay, fun topic, one that we can spend plenty of time on. So change orders. Okay, so play out the scenario. So contract signed, contractor's there, got through all the submittals. All right, let's get the shovel, let's get the hammer, let's get going. Day one comes, change order. All right, that doesn't look great, right? A little bit of egg on everyone's face. Designer gets egg on his face, owner rep gets egg on his face. All right, what happened here, guys? It could be a variety of different things. I mean, obviously, change orders have a very negative connotation, but there are some good change orders that we don't want to go ahead and overlook, like some negative change orders towards the end of a project if certain monies weren't spent on the estimated quantities, or you have change orders that can go ahead and track weather delays, for example, which is, I guess, a middle ground as far as being good or bad. But if you get a material change order on day one, again, the initial thought that pops into my head before I started doing the deep dive is, all right, what scope was missed? Like that's the first thought of what we're having. Where did we miss something that was so clear to the contractor but wasn't clear to us in this overall planning? So in a nutshell, we have change orders either going to be an increase or decrease in construction scope, which is going to require the pre-approval by the client. Okay, they can impact overall price and duration are the most important things right there. And the associated costs are going to be tracked within the pay apps. Here is going to be a sample of what we're talking about. And you see our friend the AIA right here. So document G701. I don't know how well you all can see these boxes here, but this is essentially just saying the price increase and the time increase or decrease. Those are two by far most important things. And also, as far as importance, is going to be what is considered an executed or an active change order. When it first gets submitted as a proposed change order, the intent to go ahead and do this. There's going to be discussion that's going to be held regarding that between all parties. Between the contractor to go ahead and substantiate it, the owner rep to go ahead and understand it a little bit better, the engineer to confirm the validity of it. Is this valid? Or is it represented in the contract or the plans? If so, sorry, can't happen because it's shown on sheet A701, detail 542. But when it's an active change order, that means that all three parties here have signed it. The last and most important party is going to be the owner. That makes it executed. So designer confirms for validity and make sure that it is an active one. Contractor obviously submitting it. That would be the first signature. And then to make it active, the owner saying, okay, let's go ahead. Some change order details here. Okay, weather delays, already made mention of that. Now, change orders may also impact the critical path of an overall project. Now, that should be, if it does, that should be no surprise to anyone involved. There should be enough communication amongst everyone to understand the importance of this change order and that will slow things down or have a drastic impact if there is a delay in the review in any way, shape, or form. Critical path, just a brief reminder, is going to be if you have 3 steps, that step 2 needs to happen before step 3. And if step 2 doesn't happen, and that's going to be the change order step, then you can never do step 3. Everybody will be waiting for that. And if a wait is too long, contractor may say, okay, well, I need to utilize my staff on a different project where we do have things going on. I'm demobilizing, which would be the worst case scenario, which that means that that mobilization item that you have on your bid form and on your schedule values now is going to get triggered again when they come back. Change orders can also include general conditions from the contractor, which can account for those soft costs. And some examples of some of those soft costs could include employee salaries, equipment rentals, porta potties, trash compactors, whatever you may need, or dumpsters, I mean, for the project. And change orders are going to ultimately be tracked into a change order log. Here's an example of that log. All right, so this is going to be assuming that we have a $100,000 project. Okay. You're going to have the change order number, the date approved, a brief description, change order cost, the previous total, current or the cost to date, new contract, time impact, and the estimated completion based upon the time delays. So you just have it running across there. So you start off with $100,000. First change order comes in, 15 grand. Previous total was 0. So you're adding 15 grand to the total project, 115 total value now, and also 10 days. So moving it out from the 5th to the 15th. And it's a running total, so on and so forth, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. This log is very, very important, okay? Both during the course of the project as well as after the project to understand how did you go from a $100,000 project and finish at $1 million project? How does that even happen? Right? You get a new board that comes in and they have no idea how this is even remotely possible. Start at the change orders. Have an understanding as to how it transpired. Do you have 4 change orders like you see here? Do you have 40 change orders? Do you have 400 change orders? Okay. Those are all going to tell completely different stories here. So you definitely need to be mindful of that. And with that, I do want to go ahead and open up because I'm sure we're going to spend plenty of time on the change order concept in and of itself with each and every one of these professionals on here. I first want to probably start off with Rudy as far as navigating the change orders and the presentation of it and the dialogue that occurs with all the parties when it is presented.
Time is of the essence because we are mobilized, right? The easiest change orders are, hey, can you paint those light poles? It wasn't in the scope. We give you a change order, you agree to the price, we move on. It's very rarely that easy. How do projects go from $1 million to $4 million? Well, because you don't really know what you're going to be getting into when you start a project. And you say, well, that's what I hired in.
Yeah, can everybody hear Rudy? I think, unless it's me.
I think we all lost Rudy. I think the whole Zoom meeting took a little bit of a freeze because
Oh, okay, I was like, oh no, it's only on my end.
no, I tried to switch wireless.
Well, while Rudy gets back on there, Greg, in terms of change orders, this opens up such a huge amount of issues, and I think you go all the way back to the planning stage, right? And did you do your planning properly to make sure that you deal with minimum amount of change orders?
Yeah, I
Sorry.
think.
Go ahead, Greg.
Do you have something, Peggy?
No, I was agreeing.
Oh,
Go ahead.
yeah. I think Ben said it best at the beginning. Proper planning and really good, thorough planning brings around a solid project and solid execution. I don't know if any of you saw that that implosion on Brickell Key this last weekend, but Moss made a comment publicly that the planning of that implosion took 2 years for a 5-second outcome, right?
Right.
So from the aspect of quality and design and quality teams, the planning stages really is the point that you need to make sure, and you hear this term all of the time, we need to have 100% CDs, fully designed document set. And if you go out to bid and you're getting hundreds and hundreds of RFIs, then unfortunately it probably means that the document set was not really well designed, right? Which means they left a bunch of gaps in scope, and that items that need cost basis against them cannot be defined without a response from the architect or engineer. And that is really, at the end of the day, what drives a change order. Concrete restoration is a little bit of a nuance because, as you heard Rudy said, the big term is unforeseen condition. And until your engineer and engineering inspector are actually on the building, tapping acoustically on the stucco or the reinforced concrete to understand the severity of delamination, you don't have a true quantification of those line items. So typically through the design process, your owner rep will sit down with your engineer before they take the plans out to bid, and literally go through the unit-based price quantifications. And Ben and I will have a sit down and we'll say, all right, how many square feet of full depth work do you feel that we have around this building? And we'll do a quantitative takeoff as an example of 100 balconies at 100 square feet a balcony. And if we feel that 30% of the balconies are deteriorated, then we'll carry that number. What a lot of people do in the market is they put out 100 square feet, 1,000 square feet, 500, and they're very roundish numbers. And we really try and challenge the design teams to bring those numbers to a quantity that makes sense for the project. Otherwise, the unforeseen conditions can explode a little bit. And that's where you really need to take the opportunity, because the projects are 12, 24 months long at a time, take the project at each month to reevaluate your budget assumptions, reforecast out what your spend is going to be, and communicate that with your board members on a monthly basis, keeping yourself out of trouble and really trying to forecast the impact of dollars to your project.
So I've got a question. This is a question from the Q&A. We're finally getting to one of those. Ben gave an example, and it might have been an exaggeration, of 4 to 40 or 400 change orders. But what is the line between competent and incompetent in planning and management? And has this ever gotten into litigation?
Ben, you got no sound, boss. Look, I will say that one project I've been on, it was a commercial project. We had 1,800 change orders in 12 months. But the client told us that that was going to happen because of changes that they were going to make to the design, right? So some change orders are expected. Others, in unforeseen conditions, you literally have to plan for. And how we typically plan for those, or recommend clients planning for them, is if we're doing an exterior facade as an example that has a lot of stucco replacement and a repaint. The repaint is a quantifiable number. In other words, your contractor is going to give you a job, again, going to give you a price to repaint and reseal your building. And that is going to be a lump sum number. The number that is going to be unit-based price is square foot of stucco repair, right? And or structural repair. And until you define and remove that stucco, you're not going to know what that true value is, right? So from that aspect, you really need to manage your bidding process and identify which line items are going to be unit price base. And in every instance you can, lump sum price a line item, take that opportunity to do so. That way, formalizing your budget, formalizing your number, understanding where those change order lines or exposure is going to be. And then typically your owner rep is going to say to you, carry a 30, depending on the severity of your building, age, when was the last time you did a repaint, we're going to recommend a certain level of contingency be held below the budget line in reserves in case we do run into an issue with, for instance, the stucco, and it expands from $100,000 line item to a $200,000 or $300,000 line item. At least your board is still then prepared with a contingency in place to be able to move that project forward and not create any delays or demobilization. You typically do not share that contingency value with the contractor, and you keep that in your back pocket for a rainy day, just in case. And that is just a little bit of advice from someone who's gone through it a few times before.
Frank, have we ever been in a situation where the change orders, where the customer, the association, the owner felt that they were excessive and they felt that it was negligence or mismanagement, and it was such a far cry from what the initial scope and the initial budget was, where they ask you to get into litigation? And if those do happen, is it because that the owner or the association didn't have a clear understanding of the type of work, or was it a case that it was an inexperienced engineer, owner's rep, or contractor that didn't properly manage the scope out, or a combination of both? I think that's a fair question, even though it's a tough question to answer.
No, it's a fair question. It's a question that does come up a lot of times, and in order to really do, there's not a clear answer to it, because you have to do an analysis, even on the legal side. From my seat, the first thing I would do is say, well, let's go to the beginning. Who was on the board? Who was involved? What were what was the planning stage looking like? When they sent out the bids, how much detail was in there? When they got it back, they just go with the low bidder and just said, we'll deal with whatever comes later, come later. You start there, you start analyzing that. You start analyzing where everything went. Why did we get to a point where we're issuing a whole bunch of change orders? I've never been involved, and I'm curious to see if any of you have ever been involved in a project where there isn't a change order. I think every project that I've ever come across, there's always been some level of change orders. I want to tie it back, Rudy, to what I was talking about earlier when we were talking about the contract, and I'm talking really on the perspective of the owner. I say, if I'm representing the owner, really important when you're negotiating your contract to make sure, and we didn't touch on this earlier, make sure there's some type of indemnification clause that protects the owner. If you look at the change orders on the board right there, on the very last signature is that of the owner. Let's say that this change order is a change in material. Let's say that you're going from, copper piping to something else, or you're using this type of steel versus another type of steel, whatever the change may be that is going to be implemented into the project. And it turns out that material is causing a defect, or is defective, or it's causing some type of issue. When someone comes down and is going to file a lawsuit, you're going to be one of those named defendants, right? Because you're signing off on this change order, and you want to make sure you say, look, I'm not a contractor, I'm not an engineer, I don't know. I'm signing off because I was told by my owner's rep that I was good to go ahead and sign this. You want to make sure that you have protection in that contract from the contractor and the engineer. They're protecting you in case there is any litigation that stems from these change orders. That's the sort of an offshoot of your original question. But once I do the analysis, finding out how we got there, oftentimes you do end up in some type of litigation. Maybe not at the time of the project while it's ongoing, because you don't want to stop your project and start running to court and causing more delays. But it's certainly something that you're going to hold on to and potentially file a lawsuit after the project is completed.
Thank you.
Yeah, not having a change order on a project is like trying to go to the beach and not sweat or not get wet. But remember, there isn't all bad change orders. If nothing else, just the weather delay placeholder, I think is very nice to go ahead and have, especially in South Florida when under the worst case scenario, you could have all half days of work. In the summertime, you got half days because of the afternoon rains. And the wintertime, you got half days because of the afternoon winds. And keeping in mind that if you're going to be working on like a high rise, the wind speed at the ground level could be 10 mile an hour. Nothing too crazy. But when you're several hundred feet up in the air, believe you me, it is much faster than that. So OSHA, I believe, stipulates 25 miles an hour as the max. And let me tell you, for personal experience, it is not fun experiencing anything near that when you're that high up off the ground. That was some really awesome dialogue regarding change orders. This is a critical item that we all need to be really focused on and understand how they come about and how to deal with them. And
One
which
question
takes
for
us.
One question for Greg. I'm curious to the answer to this. Greg, when you're serving as the owner's rep, how do you handle who signs the change order? Do you sign it as the owner's rep, or do you actually make a representative from the board sign?
We put an approved stamp on it, approved by Colliers. In other words, it's gone through the process. Ben's reviewed it. It was submitted by the contractor. Ben's reviewed it, or any other parties that need to, and then it gets forwarded onto the board for final signature.
Okay.
So changing into payment applications, which go hand in hand actually with change orders. Payment application, you're going to get this every single month, hopefully once a month under a regular schedule, unless you have a pretty narrowed construction scope, or there have been different negotiated terms with our friend, the contract, whether it was percentage payments, as would be an easy example here. But they're going to be submitted by the contractor every month for the work performed within that pay period, okay? Not future work, but within that pay period. If there's going to be any deviation from that, you would expect that there would also be some associated dialogue prior to submittal of that. An easy example would be making an order for 1,000 windows. Okay, it's a big financial investment. Contractor wants to stay on top of it because there's going to be a significant lead time to the actual arrival of said windows. So talking about that on the front end, getting some verbal approvals prior to could then bend that scenario, but obviously with the associated backup, which we'll discuss in a second. So the pay apps are first going to get submitted to the inspecting architect or engineer for review for the requested amounts. We're talking a restoration project, a facade job, for example, stucco, right? The amount of quantities that I see on a swing stage and when I see on a swing stage is going to be very important as to what's going to actually get submitted. So if I'm only doing the inspection before any stucco is removed and I mark off a 1 square foot area, it is reasonable to expect that that 1 square foot area is going to grow during demolition. Could grow to 2 square feet, just keeping numbers simple. But if I am inspecting and taking my final documentation, which I should be at the demolition phase, and I count that 2 square feet, 2 square feet goes on my inspection log. I should see on the backup a corresponding 2 square feet on floor whatever from the contractor. If I do not, raise the red flag. There shouldn't be a deviation at that point in time. The exposure has already occurred, and that is the extent of the repair. So that is a type of detail, or as an example of granular detail, but a type of detail that the engineer will get into to confirm what is being built.
Now, Ben, you'll give a quantity and that quantity will grow. Now,
Absolutely.
you can inspect prior to put a swing stage on every single drop of the building, and there could be, let's say, 40 drops on that building. We'll have 2 swing stages, and it takes time and material to move that swing stage to the next drop. You're not going to pre-swing and move around the whole building and inspect every square inch of the building. You're going to do a percentage, correct?
Well, not necessarily. So, at least for our projects, we will be inspecting. We have multiple inspections per drop.
Right.
So we will have anywhere from, depending on the project complexity, 2 to 4 inspections per drop, basically, which would be a variety of different phases. So the intent for stucco, the intent for the stucco is to actually get that accurate number. But
Right.
usually from like the repair standpoint of things, that may be a bit more reconnaissance, because you're also going to want to go ahead and come in and paint that pretty shortly thereafter.
But when you're building out a bid form prior to mobilization, you're not going to scour every square inch of that building.
Absolutely not.
For that bid form.
No way. And even if I was asked to do so, I would say no, because I'm not going to be right. No one's going to be right. And it's not the best use of money, especially given the fact that I will have to be on there during the course of construction. So there is a fine line as to how much is sufficient from a due diligence on the front end, right? The level of, or your confidence interval, basically, on the front end. What makes sense to do? Now, typical industry standards say anywhere from like 10 to 20% of the building, roughly, right? But that could vary wildly given the construction components that we talked about. Stucco can have some very wild quantities to no one's neglect, right? There could be one bad wall that the 100% has to go and no one knew about it and it wasn't looked at. It's an outlier, but it's possible. So doing enough and understanding the variability of that number is critical so that you can work together in that collaborative environment to forecast what you believe would be the right number. But still, as part of the payment application process, contractor is getting paid for work performed. I mean, it's no one's intent to go ahead and throw in 100,000 square feet of stucco when we don't expect anywhere near that. It's not fair to anyone involved. It's not fair to you, Rudy, when you go ahead and you plan out the team and you show, okay, it's going to be 100,000 square feet. I got more people coming in. We're ready. I'm the guy for the job. And it comes back at a fraction of that. You have half your staff just waiting around, right? From the financial standpoint of things, Greg's going to say, okay, 100,000 square feet of stucco at the coin of $25 a square foot. Okay, that's just one of those line items. We're going to need to go ahead and special assess and get this loan and that loan and this loan and that loan, and it's going to be a nightmare to even get it off the ground. That's not fair to the community, right? So trying to narrow that is where experience really, really comes into effect of having that successful team.
You're trying to forecast every square inch of the building by only investigating 10 to 20% of it. Every square foot will say it only investigating 10 to 20%. And that's because the cost to investigate every square foot of that building would be humongous. And even by doing so, you still wouldn't be right, because once we tap into that and we cut out that 1 square feet, it can go to 2 or 3 square feet based on the delamination that you didn't get from the acoustic sounding from that first point. So that's why people are always, how did the 10,000 square foot grow to 20,000 square foot? Well, it's better than you putting 200,000 square foot as a budget number and blowing everybody's mind from the cost and the forecasting. So it is a forecast, and a good engineer, a good project manager, a good lawyer is going to make sure that the board recognizes that.
Correct. And one thing to consider is, I mean, if you are undertaking a project right now or recently passed by one on your drive to anywhere, if you notice, like you'll probably see some areas that are like chalked off or spray painted off, and they might be like a really obscure shape, something that makes no sense, right? Like a star or something. Okay. Now, when the contractor comes in and repairs it, and even in the design documents, it's not saying, okay, follow exactly the perimeter of this. It is, no, make this a successful repair. Turn that star into a large rectangle, not too large, but a sufficient size rectangle to make sure you have clean lines. Aesthetically, it's going to be easy for the material to go ahead and do its function. You're lining everyone up for success, right? And industry standards, especially ICRI, which is the International Concrete Restoration Institute, and other governing bodies like the ACI, the American Concrete Institute, make those strong recommendations.
I got a few questions I just want to clear about liens. Can somebody request a partial lien without ever getting a notice to owner? I think that's a question for either all three of you. Any one of you can take that.
So as the owner, you always want to make sure you get you want, as the owner, even if you don't get the notice to owner, you do want to get your release of lien, right? You don't want to issue or allow or authorize payment without getting that release of lien. That's where you run into trouble. Best practice is obviously to go and follow to a T the lien statute, making sure there's a notice and then you get the request for release. But as the owner, to protect yourself, and Greg can expand on it, you want to make sure before any payments are issued that you're getting that release.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Now,
Yeah, 100%.
where do construction liens and releases fit into the pay app or the payment process? Is that on the AIA doc?
So it should come hand in hand as part of like even one of the supporting documents as well. So this is the continuation sheet afterwards. So a release of lien, a partial release of lien should be corresponding with this all, right? With the several items that get submitted with this. So that with this submittal, also want that release of lien to go with it, right? That is critical. So that's like a checklist, essentially. Like even from our standpoint of things, when we're doing our review, it is, all right, okay, we have the front sheet, we have the continuation, we have the invoices, we have the release of lien. Okay, check, 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 check. We are good to go ahead and move forward here. And the quantities are lining up. Fantastic. That's what we want to go ahead and see.
Yep,
One thing I want to highlight when we get over to this review is notice that this is a little bit different as far or compared to the change order where there's 3 signature areas. Here, there's only 2, right? You have the contractor and where my cursor is moving. So contractor is saying that the amount that I'm submitting for is accurate and also it's notarized right up here. The architect or engineer is going to then go ahead and certify that. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and sign it and say, yep, they're certified. I agree with this amount and here's my signature. But remember, this amount is going to include that retainage. Okay. From a standard standpoint of things, it's usually 10%. So 10% is going to be reduced off of every single pay app up to a certain point that's going to usually be stipulated within the contract. So if Rudy submits a pay app for this month for $100 worth of work, he's expect, and obviously quantities check out, he's going to expect to receive payment for $90. That $10 is going to be held on to towards the end of the project. Now, this continuation sheet is where that original bid form that we started off with gets turned into what's called a schedule of values. It's just a different name for it. Once you're in construction, it is a schedule of values. It is no longer a bid form. These are the hard numbers that you're looking at and the line items that you're going to go ahead and build towards. There should be no, or the goal is there should be no question as to what line item does what. And if there are questions, that's why you go ahead and hash it out in the contract phase, so that there are no questions. Remember, the more thinking that occurs here, the more opportunity for errors to occur. Getting over to here, I want to make sure we tackled everything. Retainage 10%. Okay, so let's talk about a scenario where pay app is submitted. Everything looks good from the technical. Contractor signature's there. My signature's there. Everything lines up. But no payment. It's a problem. Optics, starting off with just optics alone. You have 2 separate individuals that have said this is accurate. Due diligence has been done. And yet it's just sitting in queue. Why? Right? That is going to stall a project. I mean, cost is going to be one of the bigger stress points on any sort of job. So being able to process that payment in the accepted manner stipulated within the contract is going to be paramount. If there's any reason that that can't happen due to whatever sort of solvency or anything else, that's certainly an item that should just be discussed at any of these meetings that you may have, or just whenever it pops up. It should be no surprise on a successful project that there may be some payment issues. That's not a collaborative team right there. And remember, the team during construction primarily is going to be focusing on owner's rep, the board, the contractor. And Frank's certainly going to be involved, but more as a supporting role and if and when. So the folks that are in every single meeting need to be on that same page.
What's common practice, Greg or Frank, if you know off the top of your head, that when I submit a pay app to Ben has it signed, how long should it be until payment is issued or delivered? What's fair?
Well, so I mean, if we're talking typical construction, the traditional turnaround was 10 working days, but I think that's down to about 5 now for engineer review, then owner review, then submittal for payment. And ultimately, I think you could probably get the pay app turned around between engineer and owner rep within 10 working days. And then it's however long the PM company takes to cut checks from there. So, I would reasonably say somewhere between 30 and 45 days should be a reasonable turnaround.
Frank, do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. That's the exact sort of timeline I've seen as well.
We would love to see 30 days.
You didn't ask what
So would I.
practice.
So would I.
Yeah, I'll tag along as well.
Yeah.
But yes, I think that's fair to go ahead and understand that, and have those discussions very early on, right? Is to have the expectations. If there's going to deviate from that, again, communication is your friend here. Even one thing on the back end, because we're talking pretty comprehensively, is like just from a paper trail, like God forbid things go south, right? And Frank has to get involved, I have to get involved. Looking at these percentages and how these pay apps have gone is also going to be breadcrumbs and initial indicators as to, okay, maybe an explanation as to why something went south. Could there be more underneath the surface here? This would also be a first opportunity, a first spot to look at as well. Frank, would you agree?
Yeah, representing mostly owners throughout my career, this is one of the first places that I start to look at to see what happened, what was the timeline, what was paid. Even the document before the payment. Can you go back? Yeah, that one right there. That's one that I look at as well, especially if you're using the AIA document. If you look right above the contractor signature, they're saying that they're certifying that the work was, covered by this application, has been completed in accordance with the contract documents. Notice contract documents is a capitalized term. It means something. It means that you're going back to your contract and all the exhibits, again, tying all this in, the exhibits that are attached to your contract set out what needs to be installed, how to have it installed. If things go wrong, this document here gives the owner a lot of protection to make sure that the work was done in accordance with the contract documents. And contractor, you've certified and said, before issuing this payment, owner, I've certified that the work has been done in accordance with those documents. So these are the types of documents that when we're either in the context of a mediation, settlement negotiations, a discussion, one of the reasons that these things get delayed oftentimes in payment is because of those disputes, or in full-fledged litigation, these are the documents you're going to be looking at to sort of tell the tale of what happened in this project.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I'd absolutely agree there. And also, the more formalized communication vessel is when you're in the throes of construction is going to be a RFI, a request for information. Very straightforward. You got RFIs even during the bidding process of, hey, I need a little more clarity on this detail that you're showing over here. Do you want me to go left? Do you want me to go right? Okay. And during the throes of actual construction, it could be a question from the contractor to the designer or the owner, but to the designer saying, okay, well, architectural plans show the floor elevation at X and the structural plans show the floor elevation at Y. Which one do you want me to build to? And oh, by the way, my expectation was you wanted X. So if it is Y, expect a change order. Or here's the change order that corresponds to that if that is your answer. That is going to happen through the RFI realm. Okay, these are just be documented questions during the course of construction. AIA allots a maximum of 5 business days, usually per entity, for that. Sooner the better, obviously, especially if it impacts critical path. Now, I don't expect anybody to read this, but generally speaking, you have your question on your left and you have your answer on the right. So, and the question could be as simple as, okay, well, is it going to be just a plan thing? All right, yeah, it is a plan thing. Here, go ahead, and the detail is shown on sheet A123. Or it could be an actual just shorthand narrative. Or it could be a material shortage issue. Okay, let's think about during COVID. Let's talk about roofing underlayment. Okay, couldn't find it anywhere. So, all right, well, can't go with this product, can't go with slope roofing underlayment because the lead time for that is 180 days or 360 days. I want to go ahead and use product A instead. Are you amenable to that? You can start off as a question, and then it's going to have a depending on the answer, corresponding submittal, right? So we have it all documented and make sure that we're all good to go. But this is the best communication vessel as well. It's going to be tracked in a log, very similar to what we see on the change order as well. So number, subject, and the status, and running across the board. And you'll notice the total days and the review days on this example, at least, they have some pretty egregious ones of 1,100. So hopefully you're not in that camp for your project. Hopefully your project doesn't go 1,100 days. I'm going to go ahead and say that too. But this is just documented communication. And on the back end, if there is any sort of litigation, I love to look at this stuff. I love to look at the RFI log and to start there because you're going to know a whole lot. You're going to read between the lines. And Frank, I'm sure you can go ahead and echo the same with respect to this.
Yeah, no, look, the RFIs to me are sort of one of those documents you look to right away to find out also, was it approved? What was the question? Why did you deviate? Did you deviate? One of the things that I always come across, and Rudy, I'm curious to hear your comments on it, is what happens when you issue an RFI as a contractor to the designer and they sit on giving you a response, one, or they don't give you a clear response in the RFI. Do you stop the work? Do you just move on to something else and keep the project going? How do you address that?
Well, it's what we call an open action item, and that's when we get Greg involved, and that's when we get Frank involved, and that's when we get Ben involved. Because if she doesn't want to listen to the contractor, and there's a totem pole, right? Ben is the executive chef. I'm just a line cook. I'm just, I don't really have say. I'm an applicator, and I like my role. And that's why I champion Ben, and that's why I champion Frank, and that's why I champion, Greg. So if that happens, I'm going to reach out to Frank, Greg, the property manager, because if she doesn't want to listen to the line cook, hopefully she'll listen to the executive chef or the owner of that restaurant. I use a lot of bad analogies. Peggy's been around me a million years. She knows that I do. So we will try to get the answer. But in some cases, if it just kind of goes ignored and I've sent the email and now we're 30 days and now I've moved past that section of the building and I didn't get my answer, and then the question comes asked, now I'm submitting a change order because now I have to move that swing stage back, which is going to cost me time and material. And now I'm submitting a change order with it that has to be approved. And now there's an additional cost that could have been ignored. And that's why we put that 5-day maximum on it. And good experienced companies can, help execute that perfectly. This RFI sample log, it's great because it keeps transparency. Because I can say, yeah, but Ben, I got a text message that I could change the colors on the railing. Oh, but the property manager said that they wanted to go with purple on the railings instead of gray. Remember when you said that? We were at lunch. Things like that. So that's why the RFI log, if it didn't happen in the RFI log sample, if it didn't happen in the RFI, then if it's not signed, it's everything in writing. And it's just to protect everybody, and everybody should always champion that.
1,000%. I can't agree more with that because it does happen. I mean, you have great working relationships with the partners, right? And it could just be something as innocent as just a question asked on site. You can get that prior approval, but still make sure that we have a paper trail of it. Because, I mean, you're thinking about a lot of different things at that point in time, right? You want to line yourself up for success? Think less, right? Let's get this documented. Let's go for it that way. Let's stick to the lanes that what we have because they've been put there for a reason. Some flippant decisions right then and there can be very, very costly. It could get to be a very big snowball sooner than you think. And with the communication aspect of things really leads to the last item what we have on here, which is going to be the OAC meeting and the corresponding meeting minutes. So the OAC meetings are going to be weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the size of the project. Owner's rep is really going to be going ahead and driving a lot of this from the scheduling and also from the actual the minutes themselves. Now, this meeting is intended to be just a progress update, okay? The good, the bad, the ugly, okay? Hash it out. Let's get answers. It's in everyone's best interest to get as many answers as possible during these meetings, okay? There can be a lot of detail that gets discussed at these meetings, or I mean, if everything is moving or just chugging along, it could be a pretty quick meeting. But I find that there's a lot of benefit to the board to even attending these meetings, to go ahead and just see how everything is going. Now, one thing I will go ahead and say, just given my experience on in the litigation realm as well as also in the construction realm, is that from a litigation, specifically litigation, I've only ever seen clean meeting minutes. And I don't care if it has a lot of claimed construction defects or few claimed construction defects. The meeting minutes are just as clean, meaning that a lot more issues are discussed in that meeting than actually makes it to the minutes. Super, super collaborative event. It is a dedicated time where everyone gets together to hash things out. If I'm not getting back to Rudy, I expect Rudy to go ahead and say, Ben, what's going on? This like red lights are flashing. I will move from this area. If you don't give me an answer, I'm going to have to keep on trudging along and it will cost more. Those have to get hashed out.
And I will note that in the meeting minutes that Ben is responsible for an action item of response to Rudy, and it's going to keep recurring on those meeting minutes until Ben answers Rudy.
Correct. It's putting responsibility on there, right?
Transparent accountability.
It is for everyone's benefit. Everyone's benefit. These are complicated projects. This is not Rudy's only job. It's not my only job. It's not Greg's only job. It's not Frank's only job. Okay. Thinking less, having it on here, doing what's right to move things forward in a smooth and transparent way is key. And Greg, since you guys lead a lot of this stuff, I mean, where do you find that this is going to be what's the biggest benefit of doing these OAC meetings, I would say?
The true transparency of the process is really shown here. I mean, if your owner rep is doing a good job, everything that is discussed in this meeting minutes, literally the meeting minutes will be one document. Any RFIs, change orders, pay applications, any documentation associated with that week's meeting, including a schedule update if it's needed, will be issued to the stakeholder group within that meeting for that week as a whole, including the property manager. And typically, with most condo associations, if your owner rep is doing a good enough job, those meeting minutes will roll up to an executive summary that will be compiled on a monthly basis and uploaded to your portal for transparency amongst the board and the residents, that way keeping everyone on track. And that goes for phasing plans that would be discussed, logistical planning, what drops they're going down for that week, what unit owners are going to be affected and for how long. And really, it is the point of the project that all of the decisions and directions really the communication really starts happening between the building itself and the contractor on site.
Yeah, I think the coordination on site is a very, very big one, right? Okay, we're closing down the pool deck tomorrow for a year, right? That's a tough pill to swallow. Hopefully it's not you're closing it tomorrow. It's, hey, reminder, it is a month away. It is 2 months away. It is whatever. Did we get the communication out? Are we doing what's right by the community with this notice and making sure that it is to no surprise when these events occur? right? That's super, super huge, even just as the general public is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, even parking garage projects are probably one of the most common where we literally are communicating with the building management on a daily basis, Rudy, the contractor, because the expansion joint goes across 20 different parking spots and we need to move those cars and make sure that area of work is available for access. Same thing with the balcony renovation. Unfortunately, that's a little bit more painful. If you've got weather walls on your balcony and you're going to be doing complete demolition of that balcony, entering the unit, unfortunately, sometimes that's a 3 to 6 month inconvenience for an owner that's living inside a hamster box. And ultimately, communication on that aspect is highly important.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll say for those that are attending, that are board members attending these meetings, even though you may have an owner's rep, but actually having somebody there from the board attending, taking notes, and then reporting back to your neighbors as to what's going on, that's really critical. Greg just hit on it. You have a project that lasts 6 months and you have drilling and you have all kinds of stuff happening in the building. But if you're communicating it to your neighbors, it's at least they can plan for it. They know it's coming. It's not something that's just an unending, construction site when they're trying to live in their home. So attending these meetings is very enlightening to what's going on with the process, and you can participate and voice some of the concerns and issues that you're hearing as a board member from your neighbors. You can actually, pass that along to some of the folks that are actually doing the work.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, everyone at the table has a voice, plain and simple. But you don't show up, you don't have the voice. And with that, we've knocked it out. So thank you, everybody. I thought that was a lot of discussion on there. So I know we touched a lot of detail. So I mean, this was really, really good back and forth. It was a lot of fun being able to bounce this around with everyone.
I enjoyed that That format was way better than a presentation and then questions, I think.
Agreed. I mean, I wouldn't keep it straight. You'd forget it after the first slide, or I certainly would.
I have a couple random questions. I think this one's probably for Frank. If you take monies from your reserve that are not under property management control, should you transfer those funds to property management first and have them do the vendor payments for the construction job? I know some of these are very situational.
Yeah. So one, I would tell you, make sure you're talking to your general counsel, because that's a really critical question to ask. Whenever you're talking about reserve funding, you got to be very careful with how you treat those funds. So it really would depend on what the funding is for. Is it part of the construction project? It's, short answer is make sure you talk to your GC before your general counsel before you transfer any of those funds out of the reserves.
Yeah. So what I would say is, to add to that, Rudy, is you folks are getting a very good forecast on what your capital expenditure needs are in your SERS, right? So what most folks fail to realize is the length of pre-construction time that has to take place prior to that project actually executing. And really, in those early stages, you should be communicating when you identify that capital improvement need 24 months out, i.e. pool deck replacement, exterior facade. You folks should really be thinking about 14 to 18 months ahead of that in coordinating what your design costs are going to be and your administrative costs to get to a set of CDs and a permit. And that is typically about 12 months ahead of any formal construction submittal or kickoff meeting. All right. And I've heard hundreds of times folks paying for those costs out of reserve when they should have been considering that project, instead of starting at the point of a contractor mobilization, that project has actually started when you hired that design consultant or that owner rep, which is typically 16 months prior to any work start, any actual jackhammering or contractors being on site.
Exactly. And understand that even just in that, if it's going to be in the SERS aspect of things, I mean, that isn't a formal requirement to go ahead and even fund for, right? So this would have to be something separate and apart, just to be mindful of those soft costs that are certainly supporting whatever you have going on. And if you're going to be dealing with just traditional reserves and essentially want to moving them over in an operating budget, condo docs or declarations are going to likely be the deciding factor there. But if it's going to be in traditional reserves, you historically have more freedom there, obviously, compared to your SIRS.
Greg, I got one for you. If time permits, can you discuss the best way to keep board members or owners from making random visits to the work site and annoying and slowing the work in progress? If you have that answer, I mean, package it and you're a billionaire.
Short of putting up what do you call one of those electric cow lines around the I don't know how you do that.
What we do as contractors is we send out a list and we said, hey, thank you, pardon our dust, here are our expectations. Please let our men and women work so we can get your job completed in a timely manner.
Without interruption.
And our staff is hospitality trained. And if they're painting or they're laying or they're applicating something, we will push them off to the supervisor or to the director of operations, who's usually on the job. So we've trained our crews to say, thank you, but no thank you. Please go talk to XYZ. But it does take a lot of time, and it's very difficult. And that's why with enough meetings and enough correspondence and enough communication, hopefully they'll understand that we're not going to get done in time unless you kind of politely get out of our way and let us do some work. Doesn't mean if you see something, say something, but for the most part, we're most successful when we can be left alone. But
And
that's
also,
the last question. Great job by everybody. It was a great call. We have so many positive comments in the chat. Peggy is going to send out a list of all of the sponsors, all the panelists, and she's going to get their contact information. We've got some contact information in the Q&A. Ben we'll give that to him. He can pick through that. There are some people that want the slides. Once you get Ben's contact information, reach out to him. And if you have any questions, call Greg or call Frank or call Ben or call me. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to help. We're part of the community, and we just want people to be, successful and informed so they can make the best decisions. This is not an easy task, but with the right professionals in place, hopefully it will make it as easy as it possibly can. So thank you. I'll turn it over to Peggy. She's going to close us out.
Okay, yes, I can say ditto to all the comments, Rudy. You guys are awesome. I just want to add one comment is it didn't get brought up, and I don't want to open up a can of worms, but to the board members out there, please do not expect your property managers to be a project manager. That's why we have these professionals today. We're trying to stress and reiterate what the value is of reviewing the contracts with the proper professionals. Greg, excellent resource to your attorneys, everything like we all mentioned, but a lot of the expectation of the property manager is just, they really need to be managing your property, the mobility and everything else on your project. But other than that, attend the meetings, of course, and help out. But they really have too much to do, and things can fall short. And that's where you can have some issues. But let me close by saying also some of the few upcoming webinars and things that I know are coming up. On April 21st, the Palm Beach Convention Center is going to have another HOA and condo show. Hope y'all can get by there. They are offering a few more education classes. We talked a little bit about reserves. On April 22nd, I have Will Simon coming from Association Reserves giving a reserve presentation both for the general reserves and the Sears reserves. April 30th, we have for a 12 to 2 presentation, a hurricane presentation from Best Roofing. They're also going to have a panel. Hurricane season is right around the corner. I have also organized on May 19th an expo combination conference. It's called the Hurricane Huddle, Huddle Up and Hunker Down. So we're going to have 2 panels. One panel is going to be the board members with a conversation with Attorney Jane Boland. She's going to orchestrate, issues and general information from boards. And then I see you giggling there, Ben.
It's a great name. It's an awesome name. I love it.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to huddle up with the second panel, and it's going to be a panel with Daniel Baum as the moderator. He is going to discuss with public adjuster, restoration involved on that panel. So I hope you can join us. That's going to be at the Palm Beach International Hilton, and that's going to be from 9 to 2. So I hope if you're in the area, you can come by, and I will be sending out, of course, flyers on that. The next construction summit, we're trying to do these once a month, will be May the 8th. That's another Friday. And other than that, I just want to say thank you. Have an awesome weekend, everybody, and hope we can do this again. It was very, very informative.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.